Our next presenter is Mr. Greg Wrightstone, Executive Director of the CO2 Coalition. Thank you, sir, for joining us once again. If you could raise your right hand before you get seated, I'll swear you in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief? If so, please indicate by saying I do.
I do. I do.
Thank you, thank you. Thanks for being with us. Your microphone, the green light, of course, will be on when it's on, and you can begin when you're ready, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Gregory Wrightstone, Executive Director of the CO2 Coalition of Arlington, Virginia. I'm a native of Cumberland County, just to our west here. I'm a geologist, an expert reviewer for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and author of a best-selling book, Inconvenient Facts. I'm also co-author of the first peer-reviewed comprehensive paper on the Marcellus Shale. I've testified here before. I won't go into that in detail today. Just 2 points about that here in Pennsylvania. In 2008, during the research, we looked at the top 10 conventional reservoirs, gas reservoirs in the world. Those top 10 conventional reservoirs combined did not equal the gas in place of the Marcellus Shale. That gives you some sense of the scale of what we have here. Secondly, in 2008, I coined the term mega-giant gas field, which would describe any field that has 300 trillion cubic feet of gas or more. There are only 4 of those in the world, 3 in the United States, and 2 located here in Pennsylvania, the Utica and the Marcellus. That gives you a sense of the scale of what we have here. The CO2 Coalition is the nation's leading organization providing scientific information free of political bias about the vital role that carbon dioxide plays in our environment. Our membership is comprised of more than 100 of the top foremost scientists, oceanographers, geologists, economic experts, and more. Our membership has published thousands of peer-reviewed articles on a wide spectrum of climate change-related subjects. Before I get into the meat of my comments this morning, I want to update you on something that's very recent and very important that's happening with the CO2 Coalition and America. In 2009, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, under the auspices of the Clean Air Act, falsely determined that carbon dioxide was a pollutant. This is known as the endangerment finding, and since then has enabled the EPA to regulate and control CO2 emissions. It's this authority that's being used to shut down coal plants, promote to kill internal combustion engines, ban natural gas heating in homes, and a misguided attempt to achieve net zero economy. On October 14th, just 2 weeks ago, the Concerned Household Electricity's Consumers Council petitioned the United States Court of Appeal in D.C. for a review of the petition to repeal the endangerment clause. And just last Friday, the CO2 Coalition, Drs. Lindzen and Happer, I was proud to be a co-author, submitted an amicus brief in support of that. Our amicus brief found that the endangerment findings should be rescinded immediately because they were based on, number one, speculative theories, not the scientific method. 2, falsely misguided science based on consensus, and I'll emphasize consensus, which is not science, fabricated material and models that do not work, based on also government opinion, not science, and also they censored any science that contradicted their notion of man-made catastrophic warming. It's a hugely important case that's only now beginning to make its way through our system. So as you might imagine, the CO2 Coalition's focus on carbon dioxide leads us into the energy situation is what we're here today to talk about fossil fuels. I'll summarize a recent paper that was published by our coalition that states that coal, oil, and natural gas are the greenest of the energy sources. The paper was published by one of our distinguished members, Dr. Indur Goklani. He was a recipient of degrees of engineering from Michigan State University and the Indian Institute of Technology at Bombay. He is involved in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change before it was even formed. Before its inception, he was an author of the 1st, 4th, and 5th assessment reports. He was a U.S. delegate to the IPCC and various subgroups in the UN Convention on Climate Change and later a delegate. This is no lightweight scientist we're talking about here. Dr. Gloclani opens his paper with this clear statement: contrary to the claims of the proponents of the Green New Deal and net zero, fossil fuels are the greenest of fuels. He bases this on three factors. Number one, carbon dioxide emitted by burning fossil fuels has been a major contributor to the overall greening of the earth, as we just saw by Dr. Diaratna's presentation. Two, fossil fuel-dependent technology, that is farm machinery, pesticides, and fertilizers that are derived from hydrocarbons, have enhanced agricultural productivity. Number three, relative to so-called renewable energy resources, plants fueled by coal and natural gas have an exceedingly smaller footprint physically and lower demand for metals and minerals. Let's just look at that a little bit closer. When we talk about the greening of the earth, you saw some images just recently. One of those was Zoo 2016 that found up to 50% of the earth was what they call greening, or vegetation's increasing. Less than 4% of the earth was browning. That's a pretty good trade-off. I'd take that any day of the week. We're seeing this benefit. It's from the near poles to the equator, benefiting primarily from the increase of carbon dioxide. Other researchers report that a global leaf area has increased by 5.4 million square kilometers. Again, that's a good thing. Global tree cover, and we'll talk about this related to Pennsylvania in just a minute. Global tree cover, we don't see deforestation, we see reforestation. We see it globally in the United States and again in Pennsylvania significantly. Global tree cover has increased by 2.2 million square kilometers. And even again, we talk about this greening occurring from the subarctic areas. We see that actually the Sahara Desert is shrinking. We're being told it's growing. No, it's shrinking. 200,000 square kilometers of former desert in the Sahel, the southern Sahara, is now turning into a lush grassland. Increased agricultural productivity. Dr. Gloclani talks about the need, if we didn't have CO2 and fossil fuels, that we would need a lot more acreage to farm for agriculture to provide the food. He assumes it's 25% larger, that increase that's needed, the entire North America. Increased farm productivity has allowed cropland in many areas to revert to forest or other non-agricultural uses. If we look at fossil fuels required, power plants require the least amount of materials. Power plants fueled by coal and natural gas require about 12 acres of land per megawatt hour of electricity. Solar needs 3 times as much land, wind 5 times as much, and hydropower 25 times as much. So if you like to preserve habitat, it's important that you should love fossil fuel powered electricity. Similarly, coal and gas plants require significantly less concrete. In 2021, the CO2 Coalition published a paper entitled Pennsylvania's Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative Relies on Faulty Data, Why RGGI is a Solution in Search of a Problem. This is Pennsylvania-specific data. We'll make this available to all afterwards. In it, we found that in Pennsylvania, floods are declining, droughts are in decline, heat waves have been declining for the last 90 years. Pennsylvania's air and water are cleaner today than likely any time since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Crop production has increased in the Keystone State because of a combination of modest warming, which leads to longer growing seasons, and increased CO2 fertilization effect. And also, we talked about tree growth in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's amount of standing timber has increased 5-fold since 1955. In summary, Dr. Gloclani's findings in our paper are consistent with our view that fossil fuels are treasures to be valued and used for the benefit of humanity. Their demonization is irrational and destructive to our society. Coal and oil fueled the Industrial Revolution, which gave us unprecedented prosperity and health. Together with natural gas, they promised to raise billions of people in developing countries from poverty and deprivation. In short, We love CO2, and so should you. And in order to forestall a question I know will be coming, let me answer it ahead of time, what my solution is. You may have driven the Pennsylvania Turnpike and seen our billboard that's up near Newsstand. It's a picture of a woman resting comfortably in bed, and the title is, "Sleep Well, There Is No Climate Crisis." There is no climate emergency. There is no climate crisis. We see modest warming and increased CO2 leading to gigantic benefits to our ecosystems and humanity. We should celebrate that.
Thank you for answering that question ahead of time. And I know I was quoted in a media outlet when I first became ERE chairman how I like CO2 because I like my vegetables. So maybe they'll quote me again today because I do enjoy my vegetables, and I'm glad, based on your testimony, the state of Pennsylvania is doing very well today environmentally, and we have more crop growth as a result of our CO2. So thank you. Representative Vitale for the first question.
Okay, you mentioned you had some affiliation with the IPCC. So let me just read something from them dated April 28th of this year. And the IPCC is a collection of the world's foremost climate scientists. Human-induced climate change, including more frequent and intense extreme events, has caused widespread adverse impacts and related losses and damages to nature and people beyond natural climate variability. The rise in weather and climate extremes has led to some irreversible impacts on the natural and human systems, which are pushed beyond their ability to adapt. Now, that seems a little different than "we love CO2 and so should you." That would actually make a great bumper sticker. Well, here's something.
It's on the back of my SUV, thank you.
I don't doubt it. I
can provide one if you like.
And here's something from the National Academy of Sciences. We're seeing more extremes, more extreme hurricanes with greater intensity, more rainfall, more frequent droughts, along with melting glaciers, which already threaten the water supply of many communities, and on and on. And you know, when I think about the way Hurricane Maria ravaged Puerto Rico, or Hurricane Sandy ravaged the Northeast, and the wildfires, and how Katrina ravaged New Orleans, and was it Ida who turned the Vine Street Expressway into a canal? And each time I heard you can't cause. There's no effect relationship that can be established with 100%. But the intensity and the frequency of these storms, the top scientists in the world attribute them to climate change, the rising of the sea level, the heating of oceans, which put more energy into these storms. You're saying CO2 is good and nothing needs to be done. You have to acknowledge that that's at variance with the majority of climate scientists.
Number one, in our amicus brief, we dealt a lot with the scientific method. Consensus has nothing to do with the scientific method. Consensus is not science, and science is not consensus. We can point to many, many instances over the last many hundreds of years where there was a significant consensus. All it takes is one person that's right. But we have a significant bulk of the scientists, significant that disagree. When you refer to the IPCC, what you're referring to is what's called the Summary for Policymakers. That wasn't written by science. That was written by government representatives that take. There's good science in the IPCC, but it's in these thousands of pages of detail. The Summary for Policymakers is the only thing that gets read. And there's a lot to unpack with what you just said. I don't know where to start. You'll have to please forgive me. A lot of what you said was factually incorrect. You talked about increasing fires. That's false. False. The fires we're seeing in the continental U.S., the lower 48, are 20% of what they were 90 years ago. That is a fact. The area burned and number of fires is significantly less than what it was. Hurricanes, in the way that NOAA recommends looking at hurricanes, is looking for landfalling hurricanes. We know every landfalling hurricane back to 1850. So we can go back to 1850 and look at landfalling hurricanes in the United States, and they have definitely, positively, absolutely, without any discussion, they've been declining. And I took a look after Ian, because my home is, I need a new roof because Ian came through. And I'm not blaming it on climate change. We've had huge hurricanes before. But I looked at landfalling hurricanes for every state bordering the Gulf of Mexico and the eastern seaboard. There was only one state, and that was Mississippi, that saw an increase in landfalling hurricanes. All of the rest had statewide decreases in landfalling hurricanes. And we see look at Japan. We see the same thing with typhoons in Japan. They're actually landfalling typhoons are in decline. We know the fact that major tornadoes are declining. And there are a number of reasons that go into this. But we know if we look at the science, the facts, and the data, it just does not support what you're saying. And what we do know is we see that, boy, just take a look at almost every single crop around the world. We have an Indian associate that writes a lot about energy poverty, and he writes about India. India has experienced famines and droughts for thousands of years, but now their Indian crop growth has been expanding. Part of it's due to genetically modified crops that are drought resistant, that would withstand some of these things. And India is just representative of the rest of the world with breaking records of crops year after year. We see it here in Pennsylvania. And again, we should celebrate this. This is a great thing. Again, modest warming and increasing CO2, by almost every metric we look at, ecosystems are thriving and prospering. They just are. We've five times the standing timber in Pennsylvania as we did in 1955. And I will suggest the Pennsylvania Game Commission has banned any wind turbines on their property. That represents some 20% of the possible wind turbines in the United States. They banned it for a reason, because it's detrimental to their mission of preserving habitat and critical species.
Thank you. Representative Rapp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you did not disappoint in our this being our last hearing as far as information sharing and all the dynamics of the committee. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wrightstone, thank you for your testimony. And I see all the positives, and I obviously am a big proponent of fossil fuels. But I've been hearing lately on the news that over in Europe, where they are struggling because of Russia cutting off natural gas to Europe, and that the fertilizing companies are all shutting down because they do not have the natural gas, and what a threat that is to agriculture in Europe. And they're even telling their people to brace now for food shortages because of the lack of natural gas. And right here in our own country, in New England, because they will not have a pipeline from Pennsylvania to New England may indeed be facing a real crisis this winter and beyond, because the lack of natural gas to heat our people's homes. Are you seeing that, sir? Are you hearing that?
Yes. You two things you point out. Number one is this new demonization of nitrous oxide, N2O. Don't confuse that with NO2, which is a pollutant. Nitrous oxide. They're demonizing this. We saw what happened in Sri Lanka. Our friend Kevin is a Sri Lanka. That's his heritage. They've just devastated the Netherlands. They want to get rid of 50%. We have an important here at the CO2 Coalition. We're completing a paper right now, Nitrous Oxide and Climate, which is huge. It'll be maybe the most important paper we ever wrote. The first half, it deals with what would the climate change, how much warming will the continued use and acceleration of N2O do? And Dr. Happer concludes that a combination of methane and nitrous oxide combined, if we got rid of it all, it would avert 1/10, and this is methane and nitrous oxide combined, 1/10 of 1 degree by the year 2100. So what we want to do is ban nitrous oxide, which will lead to famine, starvation. Millions may be affected by this, and it's for naught. it is ridiculous. Number two, New England, there's a combination of things. New Jersey, New York have banned pipelines. What you just heard me talk about, this almost an unimaginably huge resource we have, not under our feet here, but just west of us. It's just incredible, generation upon generation of natural gas that we have developed. There's even another supergiant gas field I've written about called the Burkett Shale that nobody barely even tapping it. It's sitting there, but we can't get the gas to New England. They can't buy cheap, inexpensive, low-cost liquefied natural gas from Louisiana and Texas. Why not? The Jones Act prevents shipping from one American port to another unless it's on an American-flagged vessel. There are no American-flagged LNG carriers. So they have to buy expensive natural gas from Algeria, Saudi Arabia, and the rest. And it's just, that could be done away with an exemption to the Jones Act to allow liquefied natural gas to come into Boston. Mr. Biden and their administration could do that this afternoon if they wanted. It's just we see one, if you'll pardon me, idiotic rule after another that's inhibiting the use and production of natural gas, oil, and coal in this country.
And we've all heard that more people can die from the cold than the heat. So there is a potential there if they cannot access natural gas in New England. We could see people dying because they don't have the fuel to heat their homes. Far more people could die from the lack of being able to obtain fossil fuels to heat their home than from climate change.
Yeah, exactly. And we talked about heat and cold. Just really quickly, if we look back through the thousands of years of history, look at the other warm periods that were similar to us and warmer. All of those periods, before climate change became politicized, those warm periods were called climate optima. And they were called climate optima for a reason, because humanity benefited greatly from those other warm periods. It was the cold periods that were horrific. We're being told, oh, well, no, this is different this time. No, it's not. History tells us that we should welcome the warmth and fear the cold. That's what history tells us. And we should, if you don't look at history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, and just one comment, Mr. Chairman. I was in Virginia not too long ago. I think every inch of highway was paved with asphalt from oil. I don't think, maybe one or two bridges that were cement, but most was from oil. But I did stop with my daughter at a grocery store, and there was a charging station there. It was you might be familiar with the Volta DC fast stations that can charge up to 210 miles of range in an hour. So you have to sit for an hour and charge your car, and hopefully you're first in line and you don't have 5 people ahead of you. If I'm at a gas station and have several people ahead of me, it's not going to be 5 hours to put fuel in my car. Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you, too. I don't know if I'm going to comment on the last one, but I just appreciate all these hearings that you have done from knowledgeable people regarding fossil fuels and how concerned they are about our economy, our agriculture, and everything. So thank you, Mr. Wrightstone. I've always enjoyed your testimonies, and
Well, thank you.
So you've been very informative, and I thank you.
And before I go, I
Thank
want
you,
to
Representative
thank
Rapp.
I want to thank the chairman for his courage and strength in promoting the truth and the facts about climate change and energy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. We have 2 more members who'd like to ask you questions, Mr. Wrightstone, if you still have some time. Representative Covington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wrightstone, I just wanted to, I guess, ask you to elaborate a little bit more. When the data on Pennsylvania talks about floods declining, I represent an area that lies next to the Allegheny River out in Allegheny County. And we deal with flooding a lot. We have had some areas in our city flood that have never flooded before, including some parkways right off the Monongahela. So with me seeing information that says that floods are declining, these new areas flooding, is this not because
what-
of the environment, or, I'm just
What-
curious.
Yeah, I know that area well. I just moved from the North Hills
Okay.
to Florida. So I know about this, and a lot of the problem, as you're aware, I'm sure, it has to do with the building that's gone on in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And now instead of that whole area used to be rural, and so when there was rain and heavy rain, that water would most of it would run off, but a lot of it was absorbed into the property. As you know, now a lot of it's asphalt and concrete. And so the runoff just gets funneled down into, and I forget the stream that goes down through there, but I know that I work with Ross Township, some of their people there, and they recognize this problem. They know they're contributing perhaps to your area and the flooding. So that's a tough nut to crack after you get all this infrastructure and development. But what we do know is looking at the I particularly looked at flooding on several rivers throughout Pennsylvania for the publication here. And we did see that, floods happen, but they're not increasing, and they're actually they're declining in some regards. Governor Wolf, 2 years ago, he blamed climate change for a flood that he looked out, I guess, the mansion there, and it was flooded. Well, I looked at that flood. It was 35th all time on floods for the Susquehanna not 3 Mile Island, but whatever the island is out here, and City Island. Thank you. And so we see we have to look. We hear a lot of catastrophic claims of doom, but whenever I look at this and you look at what is the actual science and the facts telling us, it just flies in the face of so much of this. So have an open mind, look at the facts, the science, and the data. And in particular, we've got a lot of information in here. We've got a companion Virginia-specific one that we just did too that shows very much the same matter of no actual climate change impacts that are negative that are occurring in Virginia or Pennsylvania. And that should be that's a very, very good thing for the citizens.
Thank you, Representative Covington. And it's, certainly, as we talk about the floods, we still have one more member to question you, Mr. Wrightstone, if you've got time still. But when we talk about this, it's like looking at what happened with Ian. I've not taken one picture of the damage down there. I spent, a couple of weeks down. I extended my stay after we came back to my daughter's home 2 days later, and as I said, to help source propane and food and water and to until their power got back up, which was about 10 days later that they got power restored, which was thanks to the Arkansas linemen that came in and helped with that. But people had asked me about pictures. I know somebody particular had texted me. It's like, do you have any pictures? And I haven't been able to bring myself to take a picture of what's happened because it's so tragic in so many lives. I mean, there's been, over 100 lives lost, I believe, was the most recent count that I saw, and the homes lost, the personal belongings lost, the lives impacted, people displaced, and with Representative Covington's question, in my own district in the past in Butler County, I remember years ago we had a flood up in the Connequessing Creek, and a couple of homes that were flooded and floating down the creek, and for whatever individual that flood hits, that hurricane hits, I mean, that's a tragedy in their life. It's life-changing and shouldn't be minimized by us as we talk about floods. So, well, this flood's happening, that's happening, and I just want to reflect on what Representative Covington said was certainly his constituents and the floods that they're having aren't minimized by us talking about the facts of floods declining overall, because every natural disaster impacts somebody's life, and it's tragic in that life. And the news cycle moves on. Is the same with Ian. There's still, it's going to be decades in the Gulf Coast in those regions that got hit hard, Sanibel and Pine Island and Cape Coral, Fort Myers, that whole area, even up into your area where roofs are being replaced. But it's going to be a lot of recovery for a lot of people, as it is with every natural disaster. But we talk about this, and we're not minimizing it by not being a climate alarmist. We're saying, look at the facts.
And the facts tell us the most recent data from the MDAT database shows that severe weather events have declined 10% since they built out the system in the year 2000.
And I appreciated what Kevin Diaratna was saying, our PhD expert there, statistician, when he was talking about when you have the resources to respond, when you have the resources to build your structures so that they can withstand some of these natural disasters, then your people are much better off. So our nation is certainly much better off than other nations that are third world country type nations when they get hit with a typhoon or a hurricane or whatever might be occurring. That in the United States of America, we're blessed to have the resources to respond because we do generate our own power and have a better economy and more wealth created as a result of it. So our final question would be from Representative Otten.
Thank you, Chairman. And I think on the occasion of the last hearing, we found an area that we agree on, and that is not minimizing the impacts of people and families that are impacted by extreme weather. My constituents in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, are still suffering the impacts from Ida over a year ago. We have property loss, people displaced, people still living in hotels, trying to restore their lives after a devastating flooding event. And so I think, as you acknowledge, Mr. Wrightstone, the truth and the facts are really important. And something that I think that your testimony failed to acknowledge is, yes, perhaps the frequency of storms has not changed, but there is demonstrated evidence that the intensity and duration of intense weather and extreme weather has increased as a result of surface sea levels rising from a heating planet. And so I think that it's really important. We all come here serving the people of Pennsylvania and our neighbors and our constituents and our families. And so I think we have a responsibility to acknowledge the truth and the facts in their entirety before we decide whether climate change or the oil and gas industry or any of these other things are of benefit to the public. It's really important to acknowledge the lives of these people who are impacted. And I know, as I continue to spend time in my own community that has continued to be impacted by a devastating event that happened over a year ago now, it is not in our rearview mirror, and we have a responsibility to acknowledge the truth and the facts of what is contributing to that.
And I feel for those people. I was recently impacted by Ian. My home I need a new roof. You know, that's not too bad. We survived. But you know, I'm feeling it myself. I got to pay $28,000 for a new roof. That hurts. But we have to put that in perspective. Did climate change cause that hurricane? Did climate change cause it to increase? Is sea level actually accelerating? And again, in our paper we wrote about Pennsylvania, we looked at the Port of Philadelphia, the tide gauges there, they're long-time tide gauges, and take a look at it. You'll see that sea level rise began in the mid-1800s, and it's at about the same rate of sea level rise today. So sea level rise around the world has increased about 8 inches since 1900.
I think you're confusing, though. Sea level rise and surface sea temperature are two completely different things that contribute to
I'm not sure how
the intensity of
well, okay,
weather
let's look
in a
at that
different way.
then. Christopher Landsea, who's NOAA's, he's what a great name for a marine biologist, Landsea, almost as good as a geologist named Wrightstone. But he says, he's their top guy. He looked at that and he concluded that perhaps warming has increased intensity of hurricanes by 1%. It's not really clear. Let's for a moment say he's correct. I don't think anybody at Sarasota is going to know the difference between 121 and 122 miles per hour when the hurricane hits. Even if he's correct, it's so small to be insignificant. And the vast majority of scientists just do not agree that we've seen any significant rise in the intensity, and we can measure that. Ryan Maui is one of the top experts, and you can look at his measurements of hurricane intensity. We see that it's not increasing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us again. Thank you for your kind words for the last two questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you.